Hello and welcome to the Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Bottaro, and today I've got a really fun episode to share with you. I got to reconnect with an old friend of mine. We go way back to college, even in high school, we kind of knew each other. Oscar Rivera, who is the host of the Ave Spotlight podcast, Ave Spotlight with Oscar Rivera. He invited me on to talk on his podcast and was gracious to allow me to share that episode with you all, because we talk on some things that are really important for the basics. We talk about the unity of faith and science, which oftentimes are seen as mixing together, as Oscar says, like oil and water. And we really unpack why the church should be and is at the forefront of understanding the human person and what that means for mental health, what that means for the pursuit of science. And it's the weirdest thing. It's not that weird. I mean, it's understandable why people in postmodern society now separate out, like, what does the church have to say about science? Well, actually, if you know the history of science, that wouldn't be a question. But we look at now the understanding of mental health. What is this mental health crisis that we're all constantly hearing about, talking about, working on? And what place is there for this Catholic vision in engaging in that crisis? Is there really a crisis? Well, we're going to talk about that. And we'll also look at the human experience. Like, what is the threshold between normal experiences of emotion? What is healthy anxiety? What's the right way to think about our humanity versus the thresholds and the ways that we maybe cross into a realm of a disorder or a lack of health? How do we understand where the disorientation of concupiscence enters in? What do we do with all of these ideas? And how does that give us clarity in understanding our own experience, our own life? More importantly, how can that help us move towards a better life? How can we live a flourishing life? So we're gonna open up all these ideas here. We share some stories going way back to college, and really just have a good time in this episode. Speaking with a good friend, an old friend, when it feels familiar and comfortable, really does open up a different dimension of the person. And for me, I felt like this was worth sharing with you all. So I hope it blesses you. I think you'll enjoy it. And any references we'll leave in the show notes, especially Oscar's podcast. We'll put a link to that as well for the Ave Spotlight podcast. You should definitely go check that out. God bless you. I spent the last 10 years learning how to help people using the best techniques available in psychology integrated with the Catholic faith. Now we've figured out that there's a better way to help people than just slapping a Catholic label on the same secular model of therapy you find anywhere else. The real question is, how will we make this shift to a new model of truly Catholic accompaniment, keeping the psychological sciences in mind while opening up to a more human and more effective approach? This podcast is here to give you the answer. Join me and follow along as I take you behind the scenes of what this new model looks like, using recorded audio from sessions working with my team, with colleagues, and even directly with clients. My name is Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to welcome you to the Being Human podcast.
Welcome, everybody, back to Ave Spotlight. First and foremost, like always, I want to thank everyone who is tuning in. I know you have a ton of options. You can be listening to Mel Gibson right now, but you're not. You're listening to me, or maybe you're listening to both of us simultaneously and are on some weird Catholic trip. But whatever the case may be, here you are on Ave Spotlight. I greatly appreciate everything you do. As a reminder, please follow, subscribe, share this with someone that you might think would benefit from it. We are here with an awesome guest. I don't say this lightly. I like this guy. Like, I like this guy a lot, right? This guy is the founder of Catholic Psych Institute. He is a Catholic psychologist and the creator of the Catholic Psych model of applied personalism. Before he was married, he was a Franciscan friar for 4 years under the mentorship of Father Benedict Grichel. And now, well, he's a married man with 7 kids. He is to psychology in the Catholic world what Doctor Strange is to Marvel. He will take you where you need to go. Welcome, Dr. Greg Bottaro.
That is the best intro I've ever gotten.
Oh, you like that? You like that?
Literally ever. That,
Man, I was working on that. I wanted to make
that
sure
last
that
line came out of nowhere. That was awesome. I don't think that can ever actually be beat. I could retire.
that's how we do at Ave Spotlight, man.
I'm hanging up the jersey. We are the touring days are over. I'm retired.
That's awesome, man. Well, Dr. Greg, how are you, man? How's everything?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here with you right now. That's honestly, I say that all the time, and actually, and I usually mean it on some level, but this level, I mean it in all the levels. Like it's just really awesome to see you, to hang out, to talk, and to support Ave and what you guys are doing. So happy to be
That's
here with you.
Thank you. And we have a history, and we're not going to talk about our history because it goes back almost what 20 years? I'm pretty
Yeah.
certain. Yeah, we think
25, probably more
yeah,
like
we're
25
old.
if you go back to like Franciscan summer conference, like youth stuff days.
Yeah, yeah, literally. Anyway, well, we won't go into it, but we normally typically ask people at the beginning of the show like what is their caffeinated drink of choice. Most people, I mean, they we have a spectrum. There's people who say, man, I wake up, I drink a Coke Zero. There's people that are like, I like a matcha tea. There's people who are just like, I chew coffee grinds. You know what I mean? What is yours? What gets
Yeah,
your
so
body moving?
I've been hanging out with a friend of mine who started doing morning cold plunges. He does workout, sauna, cold plunge, and he said that he stopped needing any kind of caffeine. Now I lead with that because I think that's crazy, and I don't do that. So that's not my answer.
I was, I was judging you with my eyes, man. Okay, go ahead.
But I will say I do go back and forth. I've for about 6 years now. I've been doing the ketogenic diet,
Mm.
and I go back and forth. I'll take a break for about 3 months once a year. But when I'm doing it, I have to start the day with a bulletproof coffee. You familiar with what that is?
Oh, are we talking coconut oil?
We're talking, yes, the MCT coconut oil,
Let's go.
the butter. You got to put the butter. It's so creamy. It's so good.
I love how every fancy thing comes from like an old Latino house, right? Because my mom was doing this ketogenic coffee thing for a hot minute. She'd be putting scoops of butter in her coffee, and I'm like, that doesn't look
It's
healthy, mom.
really so smart. And I would, another mutual friend of ours, Luis. I remember going to his house and seeing the like huge, like blocks of butter on the counter, and they just leave the butter out all day. And it's because you need easy access to the butter, and when it's not frozen solid from the fridge, it's easier to use. So I keep my chunks of butter out on the counter. I think about Luis almost every day that I use it, and then I plop it into my coffee, little oil, blend it up, make a little sort of poor man's cappuccino,
Uh-huh.
and that's how I start my day.
Bro, I know you're Italian, but you realize you're Puerto Rican at heart, right?
Yeah.
Like he said, I had that bulletproof coffee one time, and I tell you what, man, it was the last time because I was just not regulated for the rest of the day. It was
It's a little bit hard on the stomach first thing in the morning. You do have to get used to it and kind of incrementally increase the amount of the oils in it, but it is good after a while.
yeah, the minute you said incrementally, I heard algebra, and I don't algebra my coffee, bro. Just well, that's good to know that your body like functions in some way. I love getting the intel on what just gets people moving. Uh, Dr. Greg, you're all about getting people moving, right? And it's not always just like a physical movement. It's just getting them through the movements of just life, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone's gonna have their whole, mental obstacles and so on and so forth. And your Catholic Psych Institute, like it reads in your mission statement to promote a Catholic standard for mental health and wellness by providing services and resources based on the integration of faith, reason, and science. All right, now I'm going to stop there for a second because most people, when they hear Catholicism or faith and science, they're like, bro, this is like oil and water. It's not supposed to mix.
Mm.
But can you explain why this mixes so well?
Yes, I think it's really important to know history, and the history is that most of the incredible scientific discoveries and even the scientific method are fruits of a Catholic faith.
Mm,
And people have lost track of that in the last 100 years or so, and this time period that we're in where there's been a rejection of God by society. But before there was a rejection of God by society and regular society understood God, then anything that happens in daily life, whether it's business or, industry, family life, the marketplace, and scientific inquiry, just like wondering about the world around us, the natural order of things. All of those endeavors were placed in the context of understanding that there's a God out
mm,
there who actually created this whole thing and is in some way managing it. So that the dichotomy, that sort of like separation, like the oil and water idea of faith and science is really recent.
mm,
It's not a common traditional historical reality to separate those two things. And if we return to the realities that have been very obvious to most of the world for all of history, it's like, yeah, there are things beyond our understanding, and then there are the things that we are trying to understand. And it's really kind of ignorant and naive to think that those two things should be separated.
mm. Yeah, and I noticed this because a lot of people are they just don't understand science, but also, if I'm going to be honest, they also have a very intermediate understanding of the faith. So ultimately, these two end up creating almost like this spirit of ignorance of saying like, "Hey, I whatever, let's just separate the two because I don't understand them very well." But
Right.
when they are integrated, when there is this healthy combination of the two, you find what your the end of your mission statement is that people become who God created them to be.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's an interesting thing. I recently just had a conversation with a bunch of youth, and they were talking about how they had no idea that there are Catholic psychologists or that Catholics work within the standards of mental health. And I would venture to say, and you can correct me, please, if I'm wrong, that this also is kind of like a new venture. JP2's had some awareness set some awareness about sexual identity and sexuality with theology of the body and his writings and so on and so forth. And what JP2 was and currently is to sexuality, I think Father Benedict Grichel and what the Catholic Psych Institute is to mental health today. Is this new? Like have we heard of this prior to the 90s?
Well, so this is it's a really great question. First of all, psychology as a field is new.
Mm,
It's only 100 and 20 years old or something like that. But if we look back in history, the understanding of the human person is not new.
mm,
And if we go back to the history in the church, 2,000 years, today that we're recording this, we're celebrating the feast of Saint Anthony of the Desert. He's one of the first monastics
mm,
and or hermits. He lived this eremitical life, and he's statues of Saint Anthony. You'll sometimes see him with a pig, a cross, and a book.
wow,
And
that sounds like a punchline to a joke at this point, right?
so really interesting. The pig represents the devil because he used to battle the devil all the time, and it was by the power of the cross that he overcame the devil. So that's why he has the cross, and that's why there's a pig with him.
Mm,
But the book, you think, oh, maybe that's scripture. Actually, it's not. He was known to spend all of his time in contemplation with the natural world around him being his scripture.
mm,
He saw the things of God in the world around him. So he was known to sort of study the book of nature, quote unquote. So this idea that it's through this observation, which is really what science is all about. And he was, he and along with all the desert fathers, along with, we're talking about in the early hundreds. This is like the years 200, 300. And then, St. Augustine is known as one of the first actual psychologists because
Wow.
he understood human nature.
Yeah.
And when he wrote about himself, even in the Confessions of St. Augustine, it's this really beautiful articulation of the movements of his heart, the desires of his heart. He said he wanted to be chaste. He said, Lord, help me to be chaste, but just not yet. It's like, how honest and raw and real is that? It's like, I know this is going to be hard. I'm not really sure I'm ready for this.
Can you imagine us saying this while we're making our wedding vows? It's just would be like, what are you saying, man? But it's honest and it's raw.
It's raw. And so this is like the field of psychology is like, what is it really like to be human? What are you really dealing with? How can we really help each other grow in this human life? So there's a place for the intellectual world, the intellectual life. Learn, study, memorize, understand. Those are all intellectual pursuits. But we have to go into the depths of experience, which is intellect plus the heart, plus the experience, plus the way it feels to be human. And then by studying other people and understanding ourselves, we can actually help each other become better humans. And that's really what psychology is all about. So the field is not new as it really is. The secular field is brand new, and so recently there's been more of a movement to reconnect the dots between the faith and the science. But we're really just dredging up, doing archaeological digs, pulling out some of the things that have been buried for maybe even thousands of years. We're pulling these things out to rearticulate them and present them to the modern world.
Wow. That is such a great answer. I had no idea how far in depth this goes. And just to kind of like restate this, this idea of studying the human person has been a long tradition of the Catholic Church, but as modern science within the past 100 years started to put a name to this discovery of the human person with psychology, this is where the Catholic Institute says, don't hijack what we've already started. Like,
Exactly.
got it. That is awesome. Just thinking about that just gets me fired up. My son is named after Saint Anthony of the Desert. And no shade to the golden tongue Saint Anthony of Lisboa or Padua, right? Like, there a lot of people know who Saint Anthony of Padua is because they're perpetually losing things, but my son's named after Saint Anthony of the Desert because he was such an awesome church father, to a point of it was Saint Athanasius who wrote his bio,
Yes.
right? Like, it's just, this guy is, if y'all don't know about Saint Anthony of the Desert, y'all got to do some work because this guy is awesome. But that's those tidbits of the cross, the pig. Every time I eat myself a chuleta or, like, a pork chop, I'm gonna think like, yeah, take that, Satan.
That's
um
right.
but my teens also, when I was talking to them, and this is for everybody, it's not just for teens, we're talking about individuals who are encountering a sense of, like, we hear mental health crisis more so from 2020 on. People are like, we're on the precipice of a mental health crisis. We're not at the edge of a mental health crisis. I think we're living the stages of it now, and people are more aware of it. But because of this, there is a confusion of what faith and mental health is and isn't. Can
Mm.
you kind of like clear up what is faith and mental health? What is it and what is it not?
So yeah, that's a really good question. And again, we have the gold standard, the blueprint of the human person in our Catholic faith, and because the secular world has led the conversation, they have hijacked certain parts of what's true, and then they've really misled the whole conversation.
Wow.
So here's the situation. It's like, what is it to be human is really the question. And then there's a spectrum of health and sort of flourishing as a human, and then disease and sort of being incapacitated and not being the kind of humans that God created us with the capacity for. So if you think about the spectrum, we're all on the spectrum.
Hmm.
We all have spectrumy type things going on,
Right, right. Especially
and
this
it's
guy.
like, yeah, and this guy, like every one of us, really,
Right. Yeah.
honestly, we all have stuff. And there's a couple of different directions this conversation can go because there's lots of ways that we separate out us from them. It's like, I'm healthy, they're not.
Mm.
And I'm working on myself, I'm holy, they're not. They have all these problems. And this is why in the spiritual life, we're constantly being reminded to realize like we're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. But even separating out the spiritual life from mental health is a false dichotomy. So if it's true for the spiritual life, it's true for the psychological life because what we're saying is true for human life. So being human means being spiritual and being psychological and being physical. We are body, mind, and spirit all together.
Mm.
So whatever is true for the body is going to be true for the spirit. John Paul II said the body makes visible the invisible. That's what the body is the visible manifestation of all about us as persons that happens to be invisible on a spiritual plane.
Mm.
So we can't separate these things out. And if we're all in the same boat together when it comes to spiritual life, and we need to be looking at the plank in our own eye before we start talking about splinters in other people's eyes, well, let's talk about psychological, emotional health. And so, okay, is it a false paradigm to say, okay, well, the secular science, secular psychology diagnoses people, they're the ones that own the whole conversation on psychological health, mental health. Well, that's false. I'll say that's false.
Mm.
Now, there are thresholds on that spectrum, and you might have certain manifestations of psychological disorder that need specialized intervention. Okay, that's for sure true.
Can
There
you
are
give an example?
specialized,
Can you give an
sure,
example of that just for our listeners?
sure. And just to make an analogy real quick, it's like having a spiritual disorder that now requires a specialized intervention. So you could be doing battle with the devil all day and eat your pig and laugh at him, but
Hmm.
if he comes around and possesses you,
Then you need an exorcism.
you need an exorcist.
Correct.
So there's a spectrum. We're all doing spiritual battle. We all have a certain level of spiritual unhealth. At certain points, if we're in mortal sin, we need confession. We need the grace of the sacrament for that healing. If we're possessed, we need exorcism. We need the exorcist help. Okay, so psychologically, we're all in the same boat together doing battle with ourselves, with others, and our sense of our relationship with God within ourselves. And then sometimes we cross a threshold. Now we need extra help. So it's like, okay, we all have some anxiety. But then if your anxiety is paralyzing you, you can't get out of bed, you are hurting yourself, you are, finding distraction in addictive behaviors. Okay, now it's time to call for some extra outside help.
Because you've crossed the threshold.
You've crossed the threshold.
Right.
So there's a place for that diagnosis. There's a place for interventions from licensed help, all those kinds of things. But we also can't throw out the baby with the bathwater and let the secular science hijack the whole conversation as if they own everything psychological.
Mm.
That's completely inhuman.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of psychological disorder and help that we need that comes from family relationships, that comes from friendship, that comes from spiritual relationships, that comes from participation in church, that comes from reflection and prayer in our own interior lives. That's all us still working on our psychological lives, just like we are working on our spiritual or physical lives as well. We could have this whole conversation with the analogy of physical health.
Yeah.
So that's how we need to think about the role and understanding of psychology in our normal life. It's for everyone to think about as long as you're human.
And I love that because you're saying, hey guys, there's no distinction between those who are mentally unhealthy and those who are quote unquote mentally healthy. We all mentally have some ailment that we're dealing with.
Right.
And what I'm hearing is that some of the antidotes for certain thresholds, which beyond intervention, like you had mentioned, if anxiety, you have anxiety because you're about to take a test, isn't the same as I can't get out of bed, I have addictive behavior. You're crossing a threshold there. But some of these prior to crossing a threshold can be, I guess, controlled with a sense of community. And I'm hearing community, friends, spiritual, I'm hearing community in that. And then on
Yes.
top of that, like, there is a sense of people throw everything out, right? I can't be anxious, I'm Catholic, like I pray. But that's not true, is it? Like,
Not at all. It can't be true.
wait,
We're Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry.
No, as long as we're human, we're gonna have those imperfections. It's gonna be the result of concupiscence, and it's gonna show up in physical, spiritual, and psychological ways, because we are integrated wholes.
Absolutely. Jesus himself, he's an incarnational God. He took on the flesh of humanity. If he wanted to, he could just have come at any point in time, at any stage in life, and proclaimed himself. But he started at the most vulnerable stage, infancy, and even more vulnerable than infancy. He was in the womb of Mary,
Hmm.
and trusted enough that she and Joseph were going to protect him all the way through the carrying out of the birth during the nativity. And now, within the most basic, simple, vulnerable human form, here we have this God incarnate who took on full human flesh with everything involved. He wept when his cousin died. He got angry when people were disrespecting the temple. He felt an agony right before, right? Like, for people to think that this isn't part of the human condition because we are now a faithful individual and rely on God would be a complete misunderstanding of how God created us. Fulton Sheen, Venerable Fulton Sheen says, when the church stops talking about things, the world will hijack it.
Hmm.
The world will take it and it will define it. And we've seen proof of this because in the mid 70s or early 70s up to like about the 80s, we had this huge sexual revolution because no one talked about sex at church. It was taboo. We didn't talk
Hmm.
about a lot of things. And now look at the state in which we're in. And what I'm hearing is the Catholic Psych Institute is not only raising awareness of, hey, this field has been the Catholic field for a very long time, and it's time that we take it out of the hands of secular psychologists. Not snatch it up, but like they can't define the terms.
Exactly.
Okay.
We have this even in scripture. I sometimes I thought about this. We talk about anxiety, and Jesus says, he commands us, do not be anxious about the things of your life.
Mm,
Matthew 6:24, 25. And he's not suggesting.
mm,
He's not saying, even like to the rich young man, it's like, if you want to be perfect. But he's telling everybody, like, do not be anxious about the things of your life. And then in Luke 2, what do we hear about Mary when she loses Jesus?
mm.
She's anxious. Your father and I are looking for you.
Yeah.
We're anxious. So so I looked this up, and uh like 20 years ago, people had to wait for like Scott Hahn to write a book about something exegetical, but now we got ChatGPT, which I think is a pretty awesome tool. So you can do biblical exegesis with ChatGPT. We call
like
it.
have like having Scott Hahn in your pocket, man. Like
It's
that.
basically, I made a Scott Hahn bot, a personal GPT.
That's awesome.
And I have a JP2 bot also. You can ask questions, and it's like, how would JP2 answer this question? How would Scott Hahn answer this question? But they're very different words. In Luke, the Hebrew is, and I don't know how to pronounce it the right way, because I don't unfortunately have Scott Hahn teaching me. But Odinau versus Merimnau,
Mm,
and Odinau is the Luke mention of Mary's anxiety, and it has to do with pain.
mm,
It has to do with distress of pain. And that's different than a burdened thought kind of worry,
mm,
where you're overly concerned and distracted when you think that you're going to run out of certain needs. But the Oda now in Luke has it's a sort of a natural and very human experience of sort of the reaction. It's like I'm a human in relationship, and there are going to be necessary consequences of that. It's like if I stick my hand in hot water, it's going to burn. Like that's the natural conclusion to the way the skin works and the way that hot water triggers neurons in your skin.
Mm.
If you put a mother into an environment with a lost son, the natural consequence, because she's human with emotions that have rules. It's like these are laws of physics.
Right.
Then a mother's heart is going to be in pain because of the loss of a son.
Mm.
Like that's not inhuman. That's not something you can correct and fix. That's actually perfected humanity. Mary, the Immaculate Conception, her perfected humanity. That's how a mother's heart in perfection
Mm.
reacts.
Yeah, I mean, she went through a physiological change. Would that be, is that the correct term? Like she's literally like, oh my goodness, my body's getting flushed, my heart is racing.
Yes.
I lost the Son of God. Like,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
And it's like and then you mentioned Jesus, Jesus emotions, he weeps, he's angry, he's disappointed. He's got his favorites. I
Mhm.
always love that. Like he had his favorites. Like certain friends, if you're like
Right.
Mary and Martha and Lazarus, like you're on the inside with Jesus. He's like just that's his close friends.
Yeah, and don't forget John because he's the beloved.
Yeah, of course. And you got the apostles themselves, he had favorites, even amongst the apostles. But it's like, Jesus isn't weeping over everybody that's dying all around him. You know what I mean? And it's
Right.
like when Lazarus dies, he's like visibly, physically, physiologically, actually distressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like this is human. So we have to reconstruct our mindset. And I think in the church there's a big problem with this because so much of the last, centuries focused on intellectual formation and development,
Yeah.
and it really misplaced the role of emotion in the
Yeah.
human experience.
Yeah.
So we need to reclaim that, develop that, build on and improve that understanding of who we really are and how to enter more into our faith.
And we can see that because it has been affecting all aspects of our Catholic faith, not just with the laity, but with the presbyterate and their formation of just a basic human person, and because of that, a lot of people end up really in a dark place. Like they forget the humanity of, like, say, the brothers that are priests, the priests that are out there. They forget
Yeah.
their humanity.
They
And
forget the humanity. I got to tell you, this morning we went to mass,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to name names, even though this was public.
uh
And it's I think a public scandal when this happens. And
right.
it's, but the priest, we've been going to mass. We're traveling right now. And this priest is fairly well known. He's an author. He's a well known person.
Mhm.
And, um, he called out in the middle of mass. We have 7 kids. We had all of them in mass. One of them is
Oh no,
2.
I know where this is going. Oh boy.
And it was like a little bit of a cry, like a little crying out. And we've got 6 other kids that are standing there, sitting there like statues.
Hmm.
And then our 2-year-old, because we're still training him on how to end up to be the 4-year-old that can sit there quietly, needs some correction in mass. So he cries out, we give him a little correction, and he quiets down, and we move on. Well, that is not good enough for father.
Oh no.
So he stops mass. He looks at my wife and he goes, "There's a cry room right over there for you to go to."
Stop.
And this is a university environment,
Right.
so there's a bunch of kids,
Yeah.
impressionable kids. We had our nanny with us, and and my wife, who is no shrinking violet,
Yeah. Yeah.
she responds in the middle of mass because the priest opened up the disruption,
Right.
and she simply said, "No, we will not be going to the cry room."
Mm.
And
Mm.
then, just, in a respectful tone, but being firm and responsive to what he was suggesting. And
Right.
then we went on our way. Now, today, he decided to preach on the importance of silence in Mass because it's St. Anthony of the desert today, and
Yeah.
that's then he turned the whole thing into how the mass has to be a place of sacred silence, and we need to make sure that, especially if we're not living a consecrated life, then we have even more responsibility to uphold the indispensability of silence in the mass.
Oh boy.
Now,
Oh boy.
disconnected. Talk about it disintegrated. Like the idea that that's what a priest should be doing in mass is so inhuman.
Mm,
If you think about our like where's the church at today? Like we need to be figuring out how to get more people in mass. And I'm not talking about bring the circus.
right.
Like if my kids are being if one of them is unruly for like more than a couple minutes, like we take them out. Like we'll go outside, we'll go whatever. We'll do some extra maybe some extra correction outside.
Right. Right.
We're not there to disrupt everybody. But this is just really top of mind right now. And when you start talk about like that's an example of a separation from the fullness of being human. And it could be applied liturgically, it could be applied catechetically, evangelically. It's applied in so then when we come to mental health, of course people are suffering
Yeah.
because we don't have a core uh, sort of understanding of being human that permeates every facet of the life of the church,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is what we need to bring back.
And it's interesting because you never know what exactly triggered that response from the individual, right? Like, could he have woken up on the wrong side of the bed? Could he have been going through seasonal depression himself or something
Sure.
like that? Like, you never know, but at the same time, the acknowledgement of like the full human person is that 2 year old is exactly where that 2 year old is, right?
Exactly.
Like, and it just learning. We used to be the kid, the family that sat in the back a long time ago. And then we stopped that a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was after our first daughter. We're like, why are we sitting in the back ashamed of our kids, right?
Right.
And how they respond. So we went right to the front. And
Yeah.
since then, for now, what, 11, 13, 11 years, 11 years, we've been in the front. And yeah, there are moments where our young one is like, hey, let's do it. Like, she's just like, I'm about to make a ruckus. Um, but yeah, you're right. There's a point in time where you handle it right there, and if it gets to a point where like, okay, now this is getting like out of hand, then you take away. But I've had the experience of the same thing. Have someone say or give me the look, or an usher come over and be like, hey, the cry room's over here. But then I've also had the experience of a priest just being like, not even drawing attention. He's
Right.
in the zone. He's celebrating the sacred
Yeah.
mass,
Yeah.
and just in the zone. It's interesting, man. Um, we're at the point, and I want to wrap up with this because we're at the peak of like seasonal depression. Like, individuals are feeling again this sense, especially in New England. I'm pretty sure that this triggered the American Revolution, right? Like, they were just over, and it was too cold, and it's too dark, and it's like, what is the crown doing? And
And
their
now you're gonna
tea,
tax my tea?
and you're gonna tax the
Like
one thing that keeps me
that's
warm.
it.
That's it. You didn't care about taxation without representation. You just can't tax what's keeping me warm inside.
It was just the straw that broke the camel back. It didn't even matter.
That's it.
It
And then
could have
they
been
ended up
anything.
but here we are at the peak of seasonal depression. We're about at the hump of it. And some people are just really down and out. If you can give somebody at least three random steps of like, hey, let's just get over this. Um, the at least the mental process of spiraling backwards and saying, hey, this is part of the human condition. We can do this. Well, what would you suggest to an individual?
Yeah, great question. I think if you're talking specifically about seasonal patterns of things,
Mhm.
we want to recognize that there's a physiological experience happening. Primarily it's triggered by the less sunlight.
Yeah.
And now we know there's vitamin D, and there's different things that are happening with the circadian rhythm, the sleep wake cycle, and all these kinds of things are happening in the brain. So it's helpful to start with the body
Mm.
if that's where some of this focus is on, and bring the body into the solution. So the first step, a lot of times people think, they feel like they want to lay in bed. Well, that's not going to be the best thing that gets people going. Get up. there's a bit of forcing that has to happen. And you get people to help you set alarms, have accountability, maybe schedule early morning appointments and Zoom calls.
Yeah. Force the host out of bed early. Yeah, I understand.
So, but you're basically counteracting, you're meeting that particular challenge on the battlefield where it wants to fight. And actually, we've got so many more things to win that battle than just a little less sunlight is not enough to actually take us out.
Mm.
But we just need to make sure we're applying the right interventions. So, vitamin D, and obviously people can have a nutritionist or a doctor they talk to, but there's different supplements people can take. Exercise. Actually, the cold plunge that I mentioned in the beginning here, half
Mm.
joking,
Hmm.
but it really can spark some physiological changes in the brain that can be really really healthy.
Yeah, because you're about to die. You're
And
slowly dying, and yeah, nothing's gonna wake you up like, a near death experience.
there's I did one of the plunges with my friend, and as soon as I hit the water, the first thing that went through my mind, I just like had a very serious, grave thought. This was a mistake.
It's too late. It's too late at that
It's
point, my
too
friend.
late, but it's like life flashes before your eyes, and you're like, I shouldn't have done this.
Right. Well, I
So,
mean,
but bring the body into
yeah.
it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, relationships are always the path to flourishing. We're made out of relationship, being made in the image of God in the Trinity, and we need to reconnect to relationships. So, really stepping outside of that isolation, the disorder on the spectrum will increasingly want to make people pull away from other people.
Mm,
And this is the work of the devil, the work of the world, and the work of the flesh and our concupiscence to isolate.
mm,
And if we just keep thinking about it, like we got to come out from behind the trees that we're hiding from in the garden, step more towards relationship, not trying to necessarily hide ourselves from each other, and be raw, be vulnerable, be honest about what's going on, talk to your friends, talk to your family, reach out for help. We offer consultations. If somebody's on the spectrum at the point where they feel like they're crossing maybe a threshold where they need actual professional help,
mm.
we have free consultations.
Yeah.
People can go to CatholicPsych.com, um, and contact us, set up a call, 15-minute. We'll help people figure that out. Like, where are you on this threat? Are you at this threshold? But you gotta make yourself vulnerable on some level, reaching out for help. So that would be number two.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, everybody's on the spectrum. So we're not talking about a
Exactly.
specific group. We're talking about before you get to something where now you're going to need clinical intervention. Let's that free consult. I was about to bring it up at the end, but I'm glad you brought it up. And what would be your third if you had a third?
Well, third, I mean, it doesn't hurt to pray. Obviously, bringing our prayer life into it, and not because we're going to pray it away or pray to fix the problem. You can't do that. That doesn't work because we are psychological. But we can also add to our physical, psychological interventions and attempts and efforts with the spiritual. We have to bring all three together.
Amen.
And so, yeah, you asked for three things. I gave you three things, and didn't even think about applying it in the body, the mind, and the spirit. But that's the right way to look at it.
Man, that's how the Holy Spirit works, man. He just came in, he just swooped down and said, I'm gonna
There it
take this
is.
conversation where it needs to go. It says in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 through 7, have no anxiety about anything. That doesn't mean dismiss the human person. Okay, that means
Right.
get yourself out of bed. Don't let it get past that certain threshold. Okay, but if you're experiencing some sort of anxiety that is typical to either the season or the situation, you're in good hands. That's how God created us. It's a response for us to be in motion in some way, shape, or form. But it says, have no anxiety about anything, but everything in prayer and supplication. Pray and gratitude. I heard that there's a study out there, and I'm not a psychologist, and I wish I knew where to quote it from, but where gratitude exists, anxiety can't. There
Mm.
has to be a point in time where we're just grateful for our human condition. So in prayer and supplication, not Lord, please take my anxiety away about this test. No, it's there for a reason, and it's going to motivate you to to study. It's going to motivate you to do something. I love Inside Out too, because it introduces this anxious character, and it's
Oh
like, hey,
yeah.
you have a time and a place, and not everything is the time and the place, right?
Yes.
So in prayer and supplication, thank God for your life. Thank God for the community around you. Thank God for your human condition. It's like you are alive. Things could be a lot worse, right? So
Amen.
in prayer and supplication. So Philippians 4, chapter 4, verse 6, just keep that circulating. All right, we're gonna go to a point where I'm just gonna personalize this. This doesn't have to be a long thing, but I want people to know the Dr. Greg that I know, and this is kind of like our little sign off with Ave this year. Do you remember the first time that Jesus kind of shined a spotlight on your heart that made you move in the direction that you are right now?
I remember my first, what I would now consider encounter with God. And it's no bright flashy lights or anything like that, no voices from heaven. But I remember when I was about 8 years old, and I was on a trip to the city, to New York City, with my family, and we're just sightseeing New York City, and we stopped in a St. Patrick's Cathedral, and we're walking around as tourists. Really, I had no idea besides this beautiful building, and we sat down in the pews, I guess, to say some prayers, and I remember putting my head down. I remember putting my head down, and there was uh, just a rest that came into my heart, and my head was like down on the pew, and I just like was gone, and it was so peaceful. I just drank it in, and I remember just resting, and I was there like a little too long. I guess one of my parents came, like, tapped me on the shoulder. They're like, "Wake up, it's time to go." And I was like, did I just fall asleep or what was that? And it wasn't. It was like a weird time. It wasn't like I wasn't tired. It wasn't like I was going to be napping in the middle of this huge cathedral, like laid up uncomfortably on this pew.
Yeah.
But later on, I reflect back on that. Number one, it marked me so profoundly. I remembered it forever. I still remember it. And then it was like curious, like what happened there. And as I learned more about the spiritual life, and I've read about other accounts of that sort of initial kind of thing where there's an encounter of God, that's what I've come to understand that was. So that's what I would say is probably like my absolute first memory of something like that.
That's awesome. Listen, my hope for all you listeners literally this week is that you find or allow yourself the space to have an encounter with Jesus that becomes the beginning point of your journey towards an amazing life. Both Dr. Greg and I would say, and with complete confidence, that our decision to follow Jesus was the best decision that we've ever made, even though it comes with its heartache and it comes with its pains and it comes with its struggle. It is the best decision that we've ever made. And our family, at the end of the day, we say, hey, what is your high? What is your low? What is your chocolate chip? High being self-defined, low also being self-defined, but the chocolate chip is just that little morsel of goodness, the sweetness of who God is. Where did you see that in an individual? We accept all those things within the human condition. We accept the lows, we accept the highs, and we thank God for those little morsels of sweetness. This is Ave Spotlight. Where the light of the world is, darkness cannot prevail, and we hope that you come to an encounter with that. Dr. Greg, thank you so much. You truly are the Doctor Strange. You took me to a place, and I'm gonna love every bit of it. I hope you guys didn't love this episode. Follow him, CatholicPsych Institute. Get yourself a free consult. It's gonna be 15 minutes if you're feeling some sort of way. You'll get it right on the website. You've been awesome. Thank you. We're gonna run this back because there's questions that I have for you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, and thank you for being. You're my morsel for the day. You're my chocolate chip.
Oh, bro, I'm a huge chocolate
Thank you.
chip, bro. God bless everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Being Human podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us spread the word and hear more, please head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and subscribe, as it really helps us to get our content out to more people. Be sure to listen next time as I take you deeper into what it means to be human. If you want more free content and information about what we do at the CatholicPsych Institute, head on over to CatholicPsych.com. God bless you.